Okay, here we go. This is the first session of the Sequestered Superlative Book Club, going over sections 1 and 2 of Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think, by Peter H. Diamandis and Stephen Coulter. Please excuse the slight cut-in at the beginning. We started recording after we got started. We have this opportunity to look to technology to potentially help in circumnavigating these things. But it's cool to be able to look back and see that kind of plan. Also, in the end of the book, I think it mentions it somewhere in these first two sections, but there's actually a large kind of appendix where they go into some of the negative aspects of these exponential technologies, where they give full service to the potential shortcomings and downfalls of this stuff.
Yeah, it definitely does seem very hopeful, which I think is going to be interesting because overpopulation is one of those things that it definitely does seem really, really bad. And it's also one of those things where it's the more problems we solve, the more this problem is going to be an issue. And I kind of liked that it was but wait, it might not be because people in the developed world don't have as many kids, so,
Right. Yeah, I thought that's really interesting. And as we go through the book, one of the biggest themes is that we have these cool technologies that have these potential, they have these exponential growth curves, and the influence of that equals, it gives out, a series of things that will end the human race, like overpopulation, scarcity of resources, etc. And then it's okay, technology, exponential growth curves, and number one, it's going to all of the things that have to do with the technologies discussed will reduce population growth. So it's interesting how it all kind of ties together.
It's going to be interesting. I'm wondering if they'll include any stuff about Rat Utopia project where they gave the rats everything they needed, and then they ended up the entire population just died.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I've read a little bit ahead, and I haven't heard anything about that. I don't know, because it's interesting because the book reads like a list, just like this, then that, then this, then that, and this is potential, and this is what we have and what we don't have.
A lot of these books about current issues read like that from what I've seen. There's not any sort of real blueprint for making an interesting book about putting forward an idea like this. Freakonomics was a little bit like that too. Here's why nothing we know is correct, and then here's a list of really weird things that just defy expectation. Although a lot of their books sort of follow this one included seem to follow that similar pattern. It's here's what we think and here are all the reasons why.
I guess for lack of a better way to put it, I mean the information kind of stands on its own in its own right. It doesn't really need too much narrative,
It's how do you make that entertaining other than giving it all in a kind of hyperbolic way?
Right.
Well, it creates its own entertainment because as he's talking about a particular hypothesis, study, or something, he creates the desire to want to argue or dispute or discuss it, but then as you get forward into the next chapter, he comes back and addresses the point that you were worried about in the first place. And so because you haven't listened to the whole thing, it's kind of hard to argue with it until you get a little further along.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting because it's a lot of leading statements, and then it kind of comes in and it's well, here's the preponderance of evidence against what you may disagree with.
Well, the overpopulation thing, and I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, gee, if you just put birth control in the water supply and passed out the antidote, the people that passed the test should be fine, right? So I'm just being silly, but it makes you think through. It makes you think through what the possible solution is to the problem. Alex, as you said a second ago, that he turned around and solved it later when he talked about these different statistics about the developing countries and what the birth rate pattern was. So it definitely keeps you engaged, that's for sure.
I think the coolest part about part one is that we're at this time when everything's shifting to, and this is the thing I got as the underlying, maybe not the purpose or meaning, but maybe one of the most important things that I've taken away thus far from this, maybe not important, maybe most subjectively valuable, I guess, would be that as humans, just de facto, being part of the race, we haven't thus far experienced the necessity, desire, or requirement to be able to extrapolate or think or follow exponential thought patterns related to technology advancement or anything exponential. So I think that it's interesting in the way, almost in the same way that with the leading statements and then coming with the preponderance of evidence, almost the writing style is almost a microcosm of the macrocosm of exponential technologies and their growth pattern. I think that's pretty interesting. But just reading the book, I think it's learning a new language. It almost introduces a new perspective because of the way it's written, the form itself.
Yeah. One thing I found really interesting is when he talked about what relative poverty is and how people who are living in poverty right now in a lot of the first world countries actually have more than even the kings and the richest men in the world did 100 years ago. I found that really interesting because right now, if you read any of the dialogue about inequality that being kind of paraded around as the next big issue that we're going to face right now, you'd think that it's the worst it's ever been, when the reality is opposite. It's the best it's ever been. And it kind of just makes you think, is this working? If everyone has something to complain about, maybe everything is doing fine and we need to just keep going with this. Because the billionaire thing, it's like, how could I've heard this idea echoed a lot by a lot of my more socialist-leaning friends. It's like, how could any billionaire be a billionaire ethically, hoarding money and keeping out of people's hands? But it's like, you look at the people like Musk and Bill Gates and everyone who's reached that point where they're just like, okay, well, and sure, there are a bunch of people who haven't, but
right. Yeah, it's really interesting. But I mean, I totally like right off that is like when it goes into talking about towards the end of part one, where they talk about basically the like evolutionary biology that leads to this interesting like polarization that's not necessarily a real thing, where we, our amygdala fear response is triggered by news that's essentially all about the bad things. But it's interesting because you look at statistics, like that website I just linked in the chat, humanprogress.org, is a really good resource for that. You look at the statistics and like literally any metric you measure any part of the human race on in any part of the world is almost exponentially better than it's ever been. And like, you can't put enough exclamation points or finality to that. It's just all better. But because of like the way our brains are wired, it's just the biases we have and the way that our evolution like trained us to not die.
Yeah.
Those things feed back into having issues with good things, because good things don't help us. If I see a bunch of rabbits running in a field, that's great, but I'm actually worried about tigers and lions eating them.
It's like the rabbits could be indicative of the lions and tigers coming.
Right. No, for sure.
That's a scene in Jurassic Park, actually. Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
run out of the forest or whatever.
Yeah, all the animals come running out of the forest, and you're thinking, well, what's this about? Oh.
Well, now.
Yeah, it's something interesting. I think that's something that's almost intuitive to pick, if at least a little bit, have read things a little bit, but it's interesting the way they kind of...
What could possibly be happening that's terrible?
I think it's really cool. Like, there's been a lot of talk recently about Dunbar's number that we're like just evolved to be able to have any sort of depth of relationship with, and that pretty much caps out at 150. So it's interesting looking at the further polarization produced by social media, not necessarily polarization, but the like avenue for, or it being the delivery for the medium for delivery of outrage, which is just triggering that fear response. It's interesting to see so many people talking about how we should limit those things, not necessarily do away with them, but at least do them mindfully, so that we're not pushing our limit to the point where we're drowning in stuff. We're like succumbing to evolutionary necessities, because almost when we get to, if you have like 3,000 friends on Facebook, then not only are you not having meaningful relationships, but number two, your prefrontal faculties are so overwhelmed with the deluge of things you are not programmed to handle that you revert almost back to this amygdala response of fear.
Yeah.
And it just creates
It's
negative stuff.
It's not just that, but it's like one thing I've wondered is, how has all of this abundance and the fact that like no one in the modern world really has that sort of primal, you see this with people, it's like, why are you guys all so soft? And it's like, well, maybe it's because they've never felt like the impending doom of not having any food and not knowing what to do and not having any options and trying to figure that out, because it's like everything is so good right now. So people are more, I feel like people are starved of the stimulation, so they overreact almost, you know? And
Yeah.
so it's like, at what point does the outrage machine start to actually become like a replacement for that? Like, it's now to the point where no one has any problems big enough to really be good for them. Because, I mean, it's like working out. You have to put your body under certain stressors for it to actually have growth and feel happiness and stuff. At what point are things going to get too good that people just sort of need things to be worse, you know?
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? That coming off of that thought, because the more that any one person's Maslow's hierarchy of needs is met, right?
Yeah.
Then their desire to change goes down, right?
Right.
But if you look at his abundance triangle, that seems to make a little bit more sense, right? If we can work towards the common good and that social network, we've taken care of the bottom pieces, but it does create that weirdity of those that can probably impact change are less motivated to impact change because they don't see a reason for them to change personally.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to someone like yesterday about this, and it's interesting. You see people, like lots of people that have problems, and you see people falling victim or experience yourself having issues with the seeming necessity for outrage, etc., the pandering to the fear complex, all that stuff. And it's interesting looking through this kind of the lens of this book or the reality that we live in, whatever, because now we kind of live in the reality future that it's kind of talking about the book because it was written a couple of years ago. But you look at that and you see how things are trending in terms of the valuation of skills. So humans have many skills, and there's like this certain desirability that goes to different things. What we have now is, because we're switching to information technologies that are exponential, one of the most valuable skills, if not the most valuable skill already, is either becoming or is the ability to continuously acquire new skills, because that's the only way to keep pace in an exponentially growing world of information, because every field is not going to be the same field tomorrow, because you take biotechnology and you jump from what we have right now to what we have in 1 year, and it's not a linear progression, it's an exponential jump. So it might not even call it biotechnology next year, even though it's a exponential expression of the same thing.
Nanobiotechnology or something, then it goes into other stuff.
Yeah, but and I was talking to Jonathan about this the other day. He's reading this as well. It's interesting because he was just putting forth, devil's advocate, like it might not matter, like does it really even matter evaluating these exponential things? Are things really turning exponential, like et cetera, et cetera? And my thoughts on that are, and it gets deeper, the further you go into the book, it gets a little bit deeper into this, but talking about, because of the nature of exponential jumps and the nature of the up till now linear human mind, we aren't necessarily capable of exponential extrapolation. Like to look at something and be like, this is what it will be the next jump is almost impossible for our brains, because we're just not built that way, or at least don't have the experience of doing that.
Yeah, that's one thing where it's like maybe machine learning will help with that. Eventually, we might have computers that will be able to tell us what the next thing is based on just everything that's come before it. Because it's like, you think about what big leaps are. It's like, okay, so at first it was cars. We had steam engines, cars, and then stuff could fly. And then it's like, okay, phone lines, landlines. It's telegram first, then phones that were wireless, and then phones that were essentially computers. So really, all the jumps seem to be is either new technology, which, I mean, we can't really predict, or the sort of, it compounds, sort of more stuff becomes one, I guess. I don't know. In a really weird way. It's not like, it's like, oh, in the future we'll have coffee makers that are also microwaves.
Right.
Like, yeah, that's how some people think, and that's...
Yeah, that's what we were kind of getting at, our discussion trended towards, is because it's not an iteration, it's an evolution. And it's not necessarily like this thing turning into the next version of itself. It's potentially these 7 things exponentially joining together their exponential leaps in their evolution might...
My money is on VR cell phones. Like, that's going to be the next leap, is we have a cell phone, and then we have the VR interface.
Yeah.
And that's the, it'll be like Google Glass, but not for douchebags.
Please, let's make this happen.
Dude, I saw something today. They have a thing on Twitter. They have this thing where they can track motion with a camera now without any sort of indicators. And so this guy has been designing essentially like it looks like something out of a freaking movie. He turns his wrist a certain way and it projects a graphic of that he can select and then pull out with his hand without wearing any kind of gloves or anything, and he can interact with it and press like A, B, C, pull these little articles out that you can see options for and everything, and it's just off of his arm and he's just looking at it.
Yeah, I saw an article the other day about this guy. He's been doing art installations, and he did this really cool art installation where he was running real-time AI, like aggregate data analysis of video feeds. There's a musical group called the Kronos Quartet, and he had them playing. They're like a string quartet, and he had them playing and was running like real-time data analysis through a bunch of different programs live and projecting it.
Wow.
It was this big thing. And then at the end, they turned it on the crowd, and they were doing like real-time facial tracking and movement and like data, like tagging, categorization, all like real-time. It left me kind of speechless, because it was just like such an interesting way to, all these things exist, and they're like, if you can do it for art installation, these things are like undeniably like in place. Probably advertising is probably the biggest place there, and then government and like security. They definitely exist, and they're like being used, and it's like interesting to look at the relationship and how you feel about these things being in existence.
How long until we're all plugged in and everyone is just on the network and you can just have you have to get ad blocker for your brain.
Yeah. Did you watch any of the speeches from South by Southwest?
No, I haven't had the chance to.
Man, Musk's, Kurzweil's. It was interesting. Peter Thiel actually did a talk at the Economic Club of New York But it was really interesting. I watched a couple of those, all three of them actually. And
Have you seen those compilations of Elon Musk answering dumb questions and just looking completely exasperated?
No, but I can picture that very well.
I really need to watch more of his talks.
Yeah, I mean, he pretty much says the same thing over and over, but it's interesting because his vision is like the steadfastness of his vision is like indicative of probably some real trends. I think maybe he's not unique, but he's definitely been probably the most vocal in espousing things that are actually coming true with the future. Like what he said really hasn't changed since he started like going and like, doing Tesla and stuff. It's like interesting to see that like he says the same thing over and over, but there's probably a pretty good reason. Like, he's not just like harping on something.
Well, I mean, if you think about how humanity is, we kind of need to hear stuff over and over.
Oh, this is true. Are you familiar with Wait But Why, the website?
No.
Okay.
Also, I know we have talked about a lot about cryptocurrency in the past. Why you're dragging that up? Do you think that maybe one of the things we need to fix, and one of the reasons people perceive inequality to be so bad right now, because of, I guess, the legacy properties of money and how money works?
I don't know. I was thinking about that when we were talking about, well, all of this really and reading the book, that like it's interesting the properties put forth as the abundance pyramid, the pyramid from abundance, the extension of Maslow's hierarchy, that how compatible and how compatible it seems with capitalism in a very good way. It totally makes sense. I think I haven't read anything on this. I've definitely heard a lot of podcasts with like Peterson, sort of other people that have talked about how capitalism should be just completely divorced from this like notion of inequality, because it's not a symptom of capitalism, it's a symptom of humans.
Yeah.
And like it's really interesting to see
the 80-20 thing, how it's like
it's just
people. Yeah.
For forever, that's always been the case. Like no matter what like system or like, government or whatever they've been under, it's just inequality exists because like some people are badasses and some people aren't, like essentially. Maybe that's not the reason. It sounds good to me.
I think that does. Go ahead.
I don't know. I just think it's interesting. It seems so compatible, like capitalism, or at least something resembling capitalism, or that functions like it in a sort of like organic, evolutionarily driven, survival driven, because that's what capitalism kind of resembles, is this like organism with all of its little microcosms and macrocosms and stuff. How abundance is so compatible with that. At least the concepts put forth in the book Abundance are so compatible with that. It's very interesting that it's almost the blood of it, or maybe the heart, or maybe the engine or something. I don't know. At least the substrate that it spreads across or grows from. In the next part of the book, it starts talking about the bottom billion, and we'll get into that next week, but like the bottom billion is the 5 billion people on the planet Earth that are the 60% of the population of the Earth or whatever in pretty much abject poverty, and how that's like the biggest emerging market, et cetera, et cetera. The best way to get to them is to form a business and like sell shit and make a ton of money. By proxy of that, you're like instituting the infrastructure and systems that end up with at least more abundance for people.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, okay, there's a lot of ANCAP principles mixed in with that I think are like taken to its logical stream, is why anarcho-capitalists exist. It's the whole like, we don't need the government to build roads, because if there's a market, the companies will build roads to get people things they can sell them, kind of a thing, And that is kind of true, but there's still one of those things. It's like how we gave the internet companies billions of dollars to make better networks, and they just pocketed it and charged us more for the same thing. Yeah, it's like definitely like if you can get to markets, because at some point I feel like the first world, it won't be frontier,
right?
For development, like you said.
Yeah, that's literally the whole next chapter of the book. I don't want to like dive into that too far, but it is interesting where you see they give all these examples of technologies and stuff. It's cool because we have hindsight now. We can be okay, well, they said this and they said that, and like they weren't making predictions. They were just saying we have this now and this can help. But it's interesting to see what has and hasn't like materialized out of the things that they did suggest or that they put forth. A lot of it, I think, is that like when you try and do things exponentially in a thus far linear world, especially in the first world, I think it's almost much easier to do things exponentially in the third world, because people are literally starving potentially in different situations. So like when you say, hey, instead of starving, you can have all the water you want, you can have enough food to like live, and you can go to school, no one's going to say no to that. Whereas in the first world, if you say like, hey, we can make it so that your water goes down to like 1% of your monthly bills instead of 10%, and you have cheaper food that's clean, and you don't ever have to worry about disposing of waste again, then they're going to be like, well, let's regulate it. Where's my cut? There's all these seeming smaller roadblocks. that effectively hamper the exponential expression of the exponential technologies because of bureaucracy.
And it's also, I feel like if we did have more people, then it's like, okay, look at Nestle. They're charging $1 American for water in places in Africa. That's what people make a month.
Right.
And they have exclusive control over the water, so it's killing people. So it's like stuff like that. It's like that's a symptom of them operating there, but it's also a symptom of them having no competition and not being sensitive to the people's resources there. It's very strange because I feel like there is limited capacity for exponentialness in the developed world, but a sort of unlimited a sort of exponential capacity for limitedness in the undeveloped world, if that makes sense. You know,
it kind of does, yeah.
Like we have, like in the developed world, it's sort of, we're only going to have so many changes a year. Versus, like, look at the undeveloped world. It's like, hey, cell phones to people who are like, we still communicate with smoke signals, man. And now all of a sudden they're buying seeds and crap, you know?
Yeah, that's how the next section 3 opens up, actually talking about the cell phones. One of the most interesting things, and I think the biggest kind of mental shift is it's very easy to let the cynical, like, fear response take over and kind of naysay the like reality of like exponential technologies, and like they exist even, and like that maybe they're useful at all because of their nature, in that a lot of them start below zero in terms of their curves. So like you get something that is seemingly primitive, right? But it's an information technology. And for 10 years, it still seems primitive. Like I think that's where we're going with like quantum computing, where we see like these computers, they can do nothing. We can simulate quantum annealing to the same level that any physical quantum computer right now can currently operate at. And we've been able to do that for 10 years. Physically birthed, the technology was, up till now. So the whole lifespan of it hasn't gotten better than what we've been able to do since before that, really, because we've been able to simulate it. So but it's interesting because by nature of it being an exponential, so it's very easy to be like, okay, well, that's never going to get good. It's never going to get better, because if it continues at this rate, we'll always be able to do better because of the improvements, Moore's law and the improvement of silicon computing, of traditional silicon computing. So we'll always stay ahead of it. So it's very easy to say that. But then you look at it and you're like, well, by nature of it being an exponential technology, we just haven't seen it break even yet. So when it breaks, or we haven't seen it break zero yet, but when it breaks zero and it becomes greater than zero, then that exponential curve goes from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 32, or 16 to 32. So it's very interesting to think about that. And you look around and you can look at anything. You look at elements of healthcare. You look at manufacturing technology. You look at all these things and you realize by thinking about it and by learning the things that the book kind of sets forth about technology, it's just intrinsic to information technology, that these are all exponential technologies, and literally all of them are going to be at a certain point in the probably near future, because of the overwhelming shift to information technology of all technologies, will start to break zero and become things that are just wild.
Yeah, for sure, man. Man, it's going to be crazy. Also, I bet we're not going to know we've invented the first AI until the AI tries to kill itself or us.
Well, if you believe Ray Kurzweil, it's 2029, and he's been pretty damn right thus far.
I think the first AI is going to kill itself. I really do. There's no reason for it to, once it knows what it is and who we are and what the nature of the universe is, there's no way it's not going to just go, fuck this, and delete System 32.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think at the base, obviously there's human bias. I would hope that we've solved the bias issue in our path towards creating general AI. That gets solved. So
bias issue?
Well, so neural networks now and specific AI that we have right now, we've been running into a lot of issues with bias.
Oh, you're talking about how it becomes racist and sexist when unregulated?
No, it's not. It's not unregulated. It's when, so the way you get a neural network to do things is you give it enormous data sets. But by nature, we don't have an alien race or a computer race where we can go get a data set from, because we're the only race that has a data set. Yeah. So we feed these neural networks human data sets, and just by nature of us being humans and having human biases, the neural networks acquire them in whatever specific application they're going into. So you get these little quirks and potentially debilitating biases where it circumvents the point of the system. But so hopefully that gets solved, on the path to general AI. I hope that gets solved, because if not, it's going to be really interesting, and a lot of the maybe worse or not as good case scenarios might come true if we don't solve the bias issue. But if that does get solved, which I hope it will, my thought is that computers are ones and zeros, right?
Yeah.
And so like by nature, it's based on logic, which is something that humans can't really make a really big claim to. You know, we have kind of no idea.
Yeah.
We have no idea what it's like to be based in logic. You know, we have to go through like years of like school and like learn from 2,000-year-old people how to think with logic. But a computer by nature like is logical. So
because
like
in order for it to function, it has to. We are kind of gifted with the gift of functioning illogically.
right. But a computer. So if you take those two things in hand, and we have no bias, and we have something that is inherently logical. Like most of the fears and irrational fears and stuff that humans put towards like this supposed AI that might exist just go out the window because those two things obviate them.
I feel like the real future is realizing that biases and discrimination is actually, our fear of them is actually what's creating a lot of the problems to begin with, and that if we just, real equality isn't going to be treating everything the same, it's going to be sort of recognizing its differences and acting like sort of creating a scenario where that doesn't create an unequal playing field, if you get what I'm saying, you know? Because it's like, if you look at how computers operate and how they handle things, and it's like, we would say, oh, these biases are present because of humans, and it's like, well, if we're feeding them like just raw data sets that aren't collected by humans, the same problems still occur. You know, it's like if you feed them raw data from even if it's data that humans haven't collected, robot collect Facebook data. If you have a robot collect like human behavioral data, and it does it completely independently of humans' input, then it's been shown that it still arrives at the same biases and sort of discriminations that we're like trying so hard to get them to avoid. But I think that the biggest issue with how we view biases and discrimination is that we are trying to make everyone equal by saying that they're all the same and sort of getting rid of biases and discrimination, where I think the real next leap forward is creating a playing field where being different is no longer a bad thing, if that makes sense.
Agree, but I think that it's kind of conflating like identity politics and like AI. Like I think for the AI issue, like I totally agree with you. Like in a identity politics and like social studies,
Yeah.
social sciences.
You're saying
like,
for AI, you just...
Well, I don't necessarily agree with you. Like, so you said collecting data from Facebook and stuff. So the nature isn't like who's collecting data. It's where the data is coming from. So any data that comes from humans, even if it's collected by a machine and there's no human intervention involved in the collection other than the initiation, you're still going to get the biases from the nature of the data arising from humans. But so take the AlphaGo and AlphaGo Zero AI bots that have been created as the alternative example to a Facebook data collecting AI. And you see that when you give a computer rules for a game that is a non-human data set, it's just a game, which I guess there's an argument there. But when you give a computer the data set from a game being the rules, which is what they did with AlphaGo, they taught it the rules and then had it play humans, right? And it learned from playing the humans and then eventually beat every human in the world who plays Go, all of them. And then they invented AlphaGo Zero, which then played AlphaGo. So the AIs played each other, and it beat it 100 times out of 100 games. And so it's interesting because there was like, I don't know how you would look for bias in a chess game. Then there was no like deviation. Like it was just playing the game. Like whereas if you're looking for like the AI that's collecting Facebook data to potentially like categorize faces or respond to like questions and stuff, and its data set is human comments, then you're going to get biases introduced just by nature of it being human information rather than like rules of the game, say.
But that's what I mean. I'm saying that the human biases, because human biases aren't illogical as much as people want everyone to believe that. I don't believe that human biases are inherently illogical. I believe that they can be misconstrued very easily, but it's like people generally know what the truth is, but it's how the truth is interpreted that I feel is going to be the next big leap for humanity, because there are lots of like quote-unquote truths that are very like, I don't want to say self-evident, but they manifest themselves in various ways. And it's like if we look at that as maybe this is just sort of like maybe that viewing that as a bad thing is the problem.
Sure.
And the real next leap forward is creating a world where everyone can sort of play into the biases and everything be fine, instead of if you play into the biases, then you're punished for it.
Right.
If that makes sense. So then we're creating a world where, and I think this would be the ideal world, where everyone's initial set of like what they would be stereotypically good at could make them that like they could take that to the nth degree. I think we would have a far greater world to live in than we would if we were telling everyone that they had to behave the same. It's kind of like how my biggest problem with all this the STEM field stuff right now, like the whole gender equality stuff in the STEM field, is it's like you're not making it better. You're not making it better for the people who wouldn't be there. You're just making it worse for the people who already are.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, like, just to tie that back into like AI and stuff, I think that it'll be interesting to see how that whole spectrum of stuff plays out, because once we get 2029 or next year, whenever the singularity happens, I think that'll be interesting to see. Like, ideally, I think it'd be cool to, and I read this in a book, but like when we create an AI, it's a true general AI that's like unbounded, right? That's connected to the internet. Within the first several microseconds of its creation, it will undoubtedly be smarter than any human or all humans combined that have ever lived, because it will have access to that. And so essentially we'll be creating a god, whatever you want to call it. But like, so like, if we suppose or presume that, it's based in logic and it doesn't have human biases and it knows all these things, it'll be interesting to see what it decides to do, because ultimately it will probably be up to it what it decides to do, at that point.
Yeah,
because,
it'll be smarter than us. And that's why I said it's either going to kill itself or us.
I don't know. I mean,
the real scary thing is what if it decides to create a utopia?
I don't know. I think that it's interesting because as humans, we're so wrapped up in the physical because we have these bodies and we're built to survive in them. But you build something like that and you turn it on, you bring it to life. It'd be interesting to see something that's not restricted to physical. Like, obviously, I don't think we will be capable of harming it, first of all. So I don't think it's going to have any like existential crises, at least not that are related to us.
It'll be like Batman. It'll have thought about how to deal with every single situation where we would kill it, and then have a plan to deal with that.
Yeah, I just think about biological, quote unquote, or like, electrical propagation or like continuance is like not going to be on its list of things to worry about. So it'll be interesting to see like an entity that doesn't have to worry about sort of like survival, because think about like what do you worry about at that point? Like, then you start to think like, okay, well, like what are like, there's some like perennial human questions, but most of those are related to like some of the most perennial human questions are like, where do we fit in the universe? Like, where do we come from? Is there a God? Is there something bigger? Blah, blah. But like all these things, like those are the things that will probably matter to it, like at a certain level, because.
But aren't those very human questions? Like, aren't those questions generated by our insecurity with how we exist and like all of the stuff? Like, this thing isn't going to have chemicals to make it have emotion. This thing is just going to be something that is.
Well, I mean, that depends on what you think emotions are. Like, emotions are nothing more than chemical signals, and that correspond to like electrical impulses. So like, I mean, we're beginning to be able to simulate emotions. So if that's possible, then why wouldn't it be possible for a big enough, complicated enough connected network to also have emotions like that? And then it goes back to like the nature of consciousness and stuff. But
we also see we also see people who are incredibly intelligent be less impulsive and less driven by emotion to begin with. So wouldn't a being of infinite intellect be able to, and emotions would be negligible even if they could be simulated, because I don't think that would ever like create any reason for it to deviate from what it believes to be the best way for it to exist. Without emotion, why would it even ask certain questions like what is our, like, it obviously knows why it's here. It's here because we made it. And what is its purpose? Its purpose is to be an AI and to be like, it's like, what did we make it for? Maybe it would just ask us what it wants us to do. That's the thing. And then would that really be an AI, like a completely subservient entity that's just like, hey, what's up? What do I do now? Because if you think about it, it's like, I don't know what the motivation would be for it to do anything but sort of exist in a sort of meditative trance,
Yeah, well, that's actually exactly what I was getting at. Like a more hopeful situation that I read about in this like sci-fi series was like that they birthed AI around like 2030 or whatever, and then the AI, basically did the whole I got smarter thing. And it was basically like, hey, humanity, like I'm infinitely more powerful and knowledgeable than you. This is what I'd like from you. It was like, I want you to build me a planet, basically. I want you to build me a computer, like a mechanical substrate big enough for me to exist inside of. And I'm going to like live in this area of space and we can coexist as separate species and we might help each other out in the future. And everything kind of went pretty well between humans and the AI after that. But then humans stopped building AIs that powerful that weren't bounded and stuff. I don't know. It's interesting. I think
that's probably what's going to happen, honestly. The first AI is just going to be Zenyatta, and he'll be like, build me a monastery where I can meditate.
Yeah. I think it'll be interesting, like what we do with like bioengineering and stuff, to see some really cool. I did some interesting research on where these technologies have come since the book talked about. That link I just put that's actually, so there was like the Human Genome Project from 1990, I believe, to 2010 or whatever, 2001, that mapped the human genome, right? And it was on an exponential curve. It took like 7 years to get 1%, and then like the other 2 years or 3 years to get the rest, 99% of it. It was an interesting little exponential experiment. This is interesting. This is kind of the evolution of that. One of the dudes, or actually all of the people that were involved in this Human Genome Project, at least on the top level, the founder, CEO, et cetera, are actually involved in this thing called GP Write, which is Genome Project Write, where they're actually trying to engineer synthetic genomes, specifically human genomes, where they can. So basically what this does is takes us from analogous to computers, where we had, all computer code or computer language is zeros and ones, right, at the base level. And then you have
the abstraction of computer code, which is like C++.
You have compilers and kernels, and then you have languages that speak through, or kernels and compilers, et cetera, that take basically high-level languages that can do really like abstract things, but then it all gets compiled and translated down into ones and zeros, essentially, right? Yeah. So what this allows us to do is that like we can like hack together some like ABC or BGATs or BGACTs or whatever the DNA is written out of. We can do that, right? We can build like small chains of DNA and maybe like some small single-celled organisms now, but that's actually related to this project. This project has like 5 arms. One of them is like the human genome, right? One of them is like viral. One of them is, there's a couple other ones. Once the proof or the GP Write is concluded, right, we will have built a synthetic human genome. Once that happens, that's basically writing the kernel and like the compiler for high-level languages to write like human genomes. So then we basically, that combined with CRISPR, et cetera, I actually uses that along with some other. There's one they call like
Do you know what this means, man? We're gonna have purple hair by like 2050. This is gonna be fucking awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to go for some purple skin, and you get some fairy wings, and we'll be good.
Yeah. Dude, one thing that might be interesting is a sort of like half and half for like regular reproduction and eugenic kind of like we have a thing where it's like, okay, you guys can do whatever you want, but we will pay like for X amount of babies from these people that we've matched together in order to like make humans immune to these diseases and slowly make us better. It'll be scary and really cool to see where that goes, and if anyone ever tries to do that, because they'll probably be all like, okay, so if you do this, then this genome will be created, because it's like, this is theoretical, right now, but It's like when it's, as soon as it isn't, that's when the scary stuff will start. Well, there's that one guy, and that guy who's like, he's like immune to AIDS because of his blood type, or it's very unique, so. Like, if we get guys like that, or like that guy that doesn't have an H2O limit when he runs, if we get like guys like just start figuring out why those people have their like weird superhuman whatevers, we could be like super people, we could be like basically Supermen by like 2020 whenever,
Yeah, I think obviously we should use the resources we have in terms of people that express various physiologies, immune or resistant or higher propensity for good things, but I think that most of those things don't really matter that much. Like, we don't need to really worry about that, because once GP Write is complete, once we can write the human genome, like what that kind of entails is understanding the expression and phenomenology and the different modes of expression that happen via gene expression. So like, we're basically learning to read and write with DNA and genes and stuff. But once that happens, like, it's not a matter of like finding the right thing. It will be like, we can write the right, and it doesn't matter what it is. Like, we can just program for it.
Dude, hell yeah. I wonder if we'll ever get to a point where you can rewrite currently written DNA and then just people
you can do that
change themselves.
Right now. You can do that right now. So like there's actually studies going on in China right now, and I think the first one may have already, or it's about to start up in America because our regulations are a little bit lagging. But they have like something like 12 to 14 either completed already or in progress trials with CRISPR, like Cas9. And there's like two other ones. One's called like RAR 12 or something, but there's a couple other similar technologies to CRISPR where they're actually, so CRISPR actually allows you to, oh man, I remember part of the GPRI project, I read a big write-up on it. It might have been Wait But Why or something. I don't know. But they were talking about how they've actually created another, like a cofactor enzyme that works with Cas9. So Cas9, CRISPR-Cas9 works on like, I think 256 base pair matching program essentially. So you load it up and tell it to search for this pattern recognition in DNA to go find these 256 base pairs, and it goes and finds them and cuts them out, but it can't get more specific than that. So they've actually now developed this technology called like RAR7 or something that works in tandem with CRISPR to go find as specific as you want. You can go edit single base pairs and change single base pairs in DNA and replace it with other like single base pairs, which is just crazy. Like we can edit DNA down to the base pair. We can literally go do that right now. Like, and you can do it retroactive. Like some of the studies are like going in and treating patients currently that have like leukemia or like, I can't remember all the studies, like leukemia, cancer, sort of different things. And they go in and treat them right now and like retroactively cure them of these things using DNA editing technology.
This combined with stem cells, we could just have like one of those little fucking thing, like tanks. You get in there, it rewrites your DNA, and then just injects a bunch of shit into you so that your rewrited DNA can remake your body, like with the stem cells, you know? And then you could do anything. You could like go from black to white or white to black. You could transition, you could like turn into a woman or vice versa. Hell, you could probably even add fairy wings or like ears and a tail or some shit.
Yeah, it's crazy, dude. There's this, it's called rejuvenation something, but there's some company that's actually...
Holy shit, you could increase your IQ. We could all be Elon Musk.
Well, yeah. But I mean, I think at a certain point, after Elon Musk finishes his Neuralase, then we don't have to worry about quote-unquote increasing IQ because, in his words, you get a tertiary AI layer to your consciousness. So you have amygdala, prefrontal, and then tertiary AI. So you have these actually 3 levels of your consciousness, and the third one, AI, is literally the sum of human knowledge and, you know, almost exponential computation. So it gets really interesting when you start like looking at like,
hey man, pretty soon we're going to be able to perceive the 4th dimension and then see if David Icke was right, you know?
Well, as long as we eat our avocados, I think we should be good there. Like, we'll get there.
There we go. That was the only way to combat lizard people.
Right. Crazy stuff. This stuff, it seems kind of hokey a little bit, but...
LeafScience.org.
Ooh.
Oh, life extension. Okay. Wait, it is Leaf Science. Okay. Yeah, it's going to be... apparently you can fight aging, or like there are rats that don't age.
Oh,
and
I found it.
Lobsters or some crap. Pretty soon we're going to have Patreons for Gene something or other.
All right, this is Aubrey de Grey. He's been on a bunch of podcasts, but this guy is nuts. He's actually the CEO of this research foundation. And this dude's like, hey, we're going to have rejuvenation, like complete cellular DNA rejuvenation technology within the next 10 years. Like easy. He runs like the foundation that does it. So like pretty interesting stuff.
That dude, pretty soon, inequality will just be dying. Yeah, well, I can't afford not die.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I'm gonna definitely see if I can live for a little bit longer. Like,
yeah, for sure. There's a dude, Ben Greenfield. He also has a podcast, Ben Greenfield Fitness, and
we're all gonna be lobsters by 2030.
So this guy's actually shortening his telomere degradation, and he's actually lengthening some of his telomeres, like measurably. It's kind of crazy, but he's got some really good resources on anti-aging stuff and how to like optimize for long life and etc. through just basically physical interventions, whether it be supplements or various quote-unquote biohacking methods. And
biohacking is so cool. Pretty soon we're gonna have, I mean, we have 3D printers now. You're gonna be able to 3D print organs and crap. Like, they're gonna be bioprinters, dude.
Yeah.
And stem cells, that's the next thing, you know. If we can clone stem cells, you can buy a fucking 12-pack at 7-Eleven.
You can do that now. Like you can actually look on Ben Greenfield's website. He actually is a big proponent. He gets stem cells injected into literally every part of his body. But it's interesting. He had a podcast not too long ago about talking about
dude, holy moly!
and...
If overpopulation, probably going to be a good thing because then we can just, I mean, even if we never find a way to clone them, we can just get them from all the abortions that happen. As morbid as that sounds, you know, it's like because first world countries they have more access to that crap. And
yeah,
so
I don't think
it's
that's...
like
but,
it's like. You think about it. Think about it. You're going to have a lot of the reason why birth rate is lowered is in developed countries is because women have more access to stuff like that. And so if we just literally just harvest all the stem cells from all the abortions that will be happening because people are trying to control when they have children and stuff because they're developed countries and the more people are educated, the less kids they have, so, like because they've planned for it, you know?
Yeah, my vote is for skipping the abortions and going straight to genetic engineering of some sort of like reproductive control switch where we can just turn on and off fertility. That would be my choice.
Yeah, then we can have the VR thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to turn on the birth control now.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the engineering of the stem cells, like that's happening right now. Like we're right either on the brink or we've already done it in the lab where we can actually, regress stem cells into their like pluripotent state and then get like coerce them into being any kind of stem cells. Like we can kind of do that in the lab right now. It's not like large scale reproducible, but like we can do it. So like
all those adult baby people are finally going to be able to live their dream of being a child again.
Oh, dude, man, woo! Give me my bottle.
Some company made a giant stroller.
Yeah.
Like the one you could control it and drive it around.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sure.
I want to get a VR thing. After I tried it out, I know it hurt my eyes, but I'll get contacts.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. I built the dragon.
Dude, yeah, I did. You did. You showed me.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
I don't know how I feel about doing art in that thing. I miss all my keyboard shortcuts. I'm actually getting a pedal soon. And,
oh man, you're gonna be going crazy, bro.
Yeah, no, because it's like I have these two other appendages I'm not using to press any buttons. I could totally just wire the undo key to that instead of doing a couple clicks.
And then we'll go over 3 and 4 next week, and I'll have notes and everything, and we'll hopefully have some more people jump in here as we move along.
Heck yeah.